In this video, I look at the Columbia Canal in Columbia, South Carolina. I look at a dam and a lock located at the entrance of the canal, as well as a pumping station and a hydroelectric plant. So to give some background, Columbia is located where the Broad River and the Saluda River join to form the Congaree River. And the canal is located here along the eastern bank of the Broad River and the Congaree River. The entrance of the canal is located here, which is where the lock is and the dam is. And the hydroelectric plant is located here along with the pumping station. And for any of you familiar with the Congaree National Park, that is located south of here, so downstream of this.
This is the Columbia Canal, which was built in 1824 to service the city of Columbia in South Carolina. And this canal was built along the banks of the Broad River and the Congaree River. So that back there is the Broad River, and this is the northern direction, and to this river flows south, and it flows south into the Congaree River. And this canal would have traveled along the banks of both those rivers, so the northern banks of those two rivers. And right now we're north of Columbia, so Columbia would be in that general direction. And this river would have, or this canal would have serviced canal boats just like any other canal. And this right here, this concrete path actually would have been, I believe this would have been the mule track associated with this canal. And this canal actually has something of a unfortunate history to it. It was built mostly by Irish indentured servants who were taken from Ireland and brought to South Carolina. And the conditions in South Carolina were very poorly suited to constructing canals. Well, first of all, the temperature in South Carolina gets into the hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit over the summer, and there's extreme humidities and extreme weather here. And that created a large amount of disease among the builders of the canal, so among these poor indentured servants. And there's also a ton of wildlife, things like copperhead snakes and alligators, which would have infested this region back when they were constructing it. So at the time they were constructing it, this canal region actually would have been a swamp that they had to build through. So many of the builders of this canal actually died and had to be buried on the site of this canal. The Irishmen who built this canal also would have been exposed to many diseases that are only present in the New World, and which, being from Europe, they would have had no immunity to. And I imagine the attrition rate due to disease among these workers was really high as well. We need to remember as a country that we have a debt of gratitude to people like these indentured servants who built this country and who suffered, in many cases died in the process. And this is a view of the Congaree River itself. And this gives you some idea of why this river would be so difficult to navigate and why a canal would have been needed. So you see many islands in the center of the river, rocks protruding from the water, shallow areas, rapids, and log jams like that one right there. So it would have been completely impossible for boats to travel up and down this river. And that's why they needed to construct the canal. The canal is actually, that's that house over there, and the canal is way up past probably like 30 meters from where I am now and back there. So it's a pretty good distance up and away from the river. But this also gives you some idea of the conditions that they would have had to be working in while they were digging out the canal. This would have been probably would have been a swamp. I'm actually going to go down to the Congaree National Forest, which is a good illustration of what the land here would have been like before they settled it, and the land that the canal workers would have had to, or the conditions the canal workers would have had to have been working in. And that there's a turtle on that rock. I've actually seen copperhead snakes in this river, and in some of the shallower, stagnant areas of the river, there would be alligators. but there wouldn't be alligators in this area here because it's too cold and flows too quickly. This is another view, this time with the Broad River, and you notice all of the rocks, all of the log jams, all of the shallow water. This all, again, gives you some idea of how difficult navigating this river would have been without the canal. It would have been impossible for package boats to travel through this type of fast-flowing, shallow river with so many obstacles. This is the Broad River, and to the right of me is a railroad bridge, which is still operational. The South was actually smart. They didn't get rid of their railroads the way the Northeast did. This is another view of the Broad River, and if you notice those rocks in the center of the river, those large rocks, they're igneous rocks which are part of a geological unit known as the fall line. The fall line is actually the basement rock of the Appalachian Mountains, and the fall line runs from northeast to southwest along within South Carolina. So it basically separates the Appalachian regions of upper South Carolina from the lowlands of the southeastern portion of the state where cities like Charleston are located. And the fall line is one of the main reasons why the rivers around Columbia are so difficult to navigate. And this was one of the reasons why they had to construct the canal. So the canal would be up on this embankment behind me. This embankment actually would have been the mule track of the canal, and the canal is located just on the other side of it. But yeah, the reason why they needed to construct the canal here was because there are many points like this where the river becomes completely impossible for boats to navigate. And the canals would have flowed into the region of the Congaree River south of the fall line, which could be navigated by boat. So it basically connected the Columbia region to the lower Congaree River and to markets, to ports such as Charleston. So it was an important part of the economic development of Columbia.
The fall line is a geological zone that runs parallel to the coast and marks the boundary between the Appalachian Mountains and the coastal flatlands. It is comprised of hard igneous and metamorphic rocks that form the base of the Appalachian Mountains. This rock is more resistant to erosion than the sedimentary rocks of the coastal region, which causes rapids or waterfalls on rivers crossing the line.
This is the starting point of the canal on Broad River. And if you notice this Lowhead Dam, this dam was actually used to feed water into the canal. And that right there, that structure is the entrance to the canal of the Lowhead Dam, which is at the... This is the lock at the entrance to the canal. So that right there, that dam would have been the transition point between the canal and the river. So this right here is the canal, and behind that would have been the Broad River. So this is the furthest north point on the canal, and it's the furthest upstream. And this would have been one of the more modern locks. It was actually constructed, I believe, in 1891. So it was obviously a replacement for one of the original locks, or possibly a completely new lock that was added when they lengthened the canal. But you can see the barn door style doors to enter the lock, and you can see inside the lock there, that probably would have been a bracing which would have been used to hold the boat as it was in the canal. And there's the exit, or in the lock, and there's the exit into the canal. This is a look inside of the lock from the downstream side. So this right here is the canal. And you can see there's actually quite a bit of bushwork that's grown up in the lock itself. And there's also a lot of sediment and deposits at the base of the lock, because I mean, I imagine it couldn't have been that shallow it's like less than 2 feet deep, and I imagine it couldn't have been that deep and been able to accommodate boats. But just to look around the canal, there's actually a lot of people fishing and a lot of recreational use out of the canal now. This is the top of the spillway which separates the canal from the Broad River. So this right here is the canal, and back over there where the bridge is, that's the Broad River, and the spillway is over there, or the Lowhead Dam is over there. So that dam would channel water through this into this canal. And that was used, and this spillway was used to control the depth of the canal. And down there you can see from above, that is the lock which was used as an entrance to the canal. And this portion of the canal was actually constructed really late. It was constructed in 1891 as part of an extension of the canal, so they extended the length of the canal something on the order of 1,000 feet. And this was done to make the canal more viable for powering industry. So they transitioned over from using this canal as a transportation canal to using it primarily as an industrial canal to power things like mills and that power station. So as part of that, they extended the canal up. I guess that was probably to ensure that it was able to capture more water, to provide more water to power the dam and so forth. But you can see the machinery for controlling the spillway. It's pretty modern machinery because it was constructed in the 1890s rather than in the 1820s when the original canal was constructed. And you can probably hear the water going over the spillway, so you can see the difference in the level from the Broad River and the canal level over there. Must be about a 10-foot difference between the level of the river and the level of the canal at this point. And that right there, I imagine, was one of the posts for whoever operated this lock. And this is a picture of the spillway from the Broad River side. You can see some logs and debris have accumulated on the one entrance to the spillway that's open. That building right there is a pump house that was constructed in 1924, and they actually would have pumped water from the Broad River across the canal to a water treatment plant which would have been located behind those bushes there. But what's interesting about this and relevant to the canal is they actually used hydropower from the canal to operate the pumps of this pump house. So even after the canal was no longer viable as a means of transportation, they were still using it to provide hydropower. This is a hydraulic turbine house, and this right here is the front of the pump house that I showed you earlier. And this hydraulic turbine would have been used to pump the water from Broad River to the treatment plant to serve as drinking water for Columbia. And this, believe it or not, used hydraulic power from the canal to power these pumps. I believe at one point they also used steam power as well. Another shot of the turbine. So that right there would have been the actual turbine which powered the pump, and this here would have been the pumping mechanism. So in that orange box, I imagine it would have been a flywheel that was turned by the turbine, and that would have powered, let me just go back here and see if I can't get the entire thing. That would have powered the pumping mechanism, which was in this here, and would have pumped water up through that pipe there to the treatment plant. And as you can see, there's actually two of these. So there's a second one on the other side right there, and there's the turbine for that one, the flywheel, and the pumping mechanism. And you can also see the building that's located inside was a brick building. And you can see it's, even though it's a utility building, they actually at least put some design, some work into the design of the windows. And there's a good amount of natural light in this building. And out the window here, you can see the, what would be the Congaree River. And the canal is actually located on the opposite side of this house. So we're looking, I believe it will be west right now, towards the river, and the canal would have been located to the east of where we are, so behind me. And there's another view of the pump house. And here is a view of the front of the turbine house. This would have been the front facing the direction of the canal and away from the river. So notice these massive pipes here, one for each of the turbines. They would have been what carried the water up to the treatment plant, which would be located in that general direction. This is the remains of a hydroelectric plant that was constructed around the canal. So behind me here is the Broad River, which is flowing downstream that way, so that direction is the southeast. And behind the hydroelectric plant is the canal. The canal will be flowing behind the plant, and this plant actually used the water from the canal to generate electricity. And this plant would have powered many of the mills that grew up in Columbia around the 1890s, and actually was one of the main sources of power which fueled the growth of Columbia as an industrialized city. This hydroelectric plant was actually one of the first uses of water power, hydroelectric power, to generate electricity. And it's interesting how they took this old canal and they converted it to a new use of generating electricity. And it would have been used to power things like cotton mills, which were common in Columbia in the 1890s. I believe that there would have been the location of the turbine or something, and that would have been the spillway. And you can see the rudimentary construction compared to modern dams. This dam's basically just roughly cut stones that are concrete, that are put together, held together using concrete. And unfortunately, that path on top of the dam is closed right now. Otherwise, I'd go and take a look from the path up top. But here's another view of the Broad River. And you can see some geese or ducks in the center of the river. This is a view of the hydroelectric dam from the top. That house there is the structure that I believe housed the turbines. And the walkway is the walkway on the top of the dam. The Broad River is to the right of me. And to the left of me, that's the canal there. So you notice the canal is at the top level of the dam. And that's the water they would have used to power the turbines in this dam to generate the electricity. This is one more shot of the top of the dam, and that right there is the canal. And you notice the spillway and the generator house, and you can also notice that interesting wooden pole there in the center. I believe that was a very, very primitive form of a electrical or telephone pole, which would have been used to carry electricity from the dam. And behind me here, that is a modern water treatment plant. Just to give some idea of the type of wildlife that they would have had to deal with while digging this canal, I came across this sign here: alligators may live here. And that back there is the canal, and behind me is the Broad River. And this entire region, especially before Columbia was developed would have been infested with alligators, and I imagine many of the Irishmen who dug out this canal died as a result of alligators. Really, any water in South Carolina or the South, you have to assume has alligators in it, so you have to be really, really careful. But yeah, sign says it's unlawful to feed alligators. And remember, a fed gator is a dead gator. So I guess if you feed an alligator, they start to associate humans with food, and then they may become socialized and come close to people, and they eventually would have to euthanize the alligator. So yeah, it's best for us to leave the alligators alone and for the alligators to leave us alone. This is a monument that was built in dedication to all the Irishmen who died building this canal. See, it says, in memory of the Irish who built the canal, they were indentured to the river they linked.